Look at the bones. In a cave in Shanidar, Iraq, archaeologists pulled a skeleton out of the ground and just stopped. The right arm had wasted away to almost nothing. The left eye socket had caved inward from a childhood injury. The right ear canal was completely fused shut. This man they call him Shanidar 1 couldn't hunt, couldn't fight, couldn't feed himself or outrun anything that moved through the Zagros Mountains 40,000 years ago. And fossil records suggest he made it to around 40 years old. In the Neanderthal world, that's ancient. Wait, really sit with that. Someone fed this man. Someone decided, day after day, not to walk away. Not for a week, not for a season, for decades. Neanderthals put flowers in their graves. They kept their most broken members alive. Whatever that is, whatever word you want to use for it. It looks, from 40,000 years out, almost exactly like compassion. So here's what I can't shake if they had that. If they genuinely cared for each other like that, why are they gone? Why are we the ones still here and not them? Here's the thing that should genuinely unsettle you. We were not the obvious choice. For something like 300,000 years, at least 8 human species were alive on this planet at the same time. Neanderthals, wider, denser, stronger than us, had already survived 2 ice ages before Homo sapiens showed up. Denisovans ranged from Siberia all the way down to Southeast Asia, territory that dwarfs anything our early ancestors managed. Homo erectus had been walking upright and controlling fire for close to 2 million years. 2 million. Homo floresiensis, barely 3.5 feet tall, hunted in coordinated groups on a remote island with a brain roughly the size of a grapefruit. Homo luzonensis was carving tools in the Philippines while our ancestors were still pinned down in Africa trying to figure out how to leave. Not one of these species was a failure waiting to happen. Every single one was sharper, tougher, or better fitted to its world than we were. More experience, more time, more reasons, on paper, to still be here. So drop the survival of the fittest framing, it doesn't hold. The real puzzle is stranger than that. Why did the youngest species, the physically weakest, the most recent arrival, end up as the last one standing? This isn't a story about strength. It's a story about a completely different kind of weapon. 70,000 years ago, a mountain in Sumatra blew itself apart. Mount Toba didn't just erupt. Researchers estimate it released energy on a scale that makes every volcanic event in recorded human history look minor. Ash darkened the sky for years. Temperatures across the globe dropped hard. Forests died. The food chains holding ecosystems together across Asia and Africa collapsed. Fast. Now imagine being alive in that. The sun barely making it through. The air carrying ash and cold. The animals you depended on gone. The plants gone. And your entire species, according to genetic bottleneck evidence, had been squeezed down to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals, not families, people, on the whole planet. That's smaller than the staff of a mid-sized company. Small enough that every living human being at that moment could have fit inside one sports stadium, with room to spare. Meanwhile, Neanderthals were holding steady in Europe. Denisovans were spread across Asia, their bodies already genetically tuned to altitudes and cold that would have shut us down entirely. By any honest accounting, Homo sapiens should have become the 9th extinct human species on that list. We didn't. But what pulled us back had nothing to do with muscle or immune system or bone structure. Fossil records point towards something else. Something that left almost no trace in the ground. You can't weigh it. You can't date it with carbon. We came within a breath of disappearing entirely. And what kept us here is almost certainly not what you're thinking. Start with the Neanderthals, because they deserve a better story than the one we've been telling about them. Shanidar 1 wasn't an exception. Dig sites from Spain to Iraq have turned up Neanderthal skeletons with old, fully healed injuries, fractures that took months to mend, which means someone was bringing food, providing cover, keeping that person alive through recovery. They buried their dead. They painted their skin with pigment. They made tools with a level of craft that took researchers genuinely decades to fully credit. These weren't grunting brutes shuffling through the dark. These were people. Their hunting reflected that same intelligence. Wound patterns on prey bones tell us they hunted in tight formation, 4 to 8 individuals, close contact ambushes, thrusting spears rather than thrown ones. Up close, precise, coordinated. And that system worked with brutal, consistent efficiency for 400,000 years. That's not luck. That's mastery. Then the climate moved on them. Megafauna shifted range. Prey herds got larger, faster, spread out across open ground where a forest ambush was worthless. Suddenly, 8 people weren't enough. You needed 80, or 800, moving together, coordinating across groups that had never shared a fire, never exchanged names, never had any reason to trust each other. And that's where Neanderthal loyalty, which had been their greatest asset, became a wall they couldn't get over. They trusted the people they'd grown up with, the 15 or so individuals who'd been there from the beginning, whose faces they knew cold, whose injuries they'd bandaged. That bond was real. Shanidar 1 is proof of how real it was, but it couldn't stretch past the edge of what they could personally see. It had no mechanism to reach a stranger 2 valleys over and say, "We're the same, come with us." This is bigger than your hillside. The thing that kept them alive, that fierce, tight, unbreakable loyalty, ended up being the exact thing that capped them. Strength pointed only inward eventually becomes a ceiling. The Denisovans are a different kind of haunting. We didn't even know they existed until 2010. One finger bone pulled from a cave in Siberia carried DNA distinct enough from both Neanderthals and sapiens to mark an entirely separate human lineage. Since then, researchers have traced Denisovan genetics from the Tibetan Plateau down through the Philippines, one of the broadest geographic footprints of any archaic human we know of. What they could do is almost hard to believe. Tibetan people today carry a gene variant, EPAS1, that lets their bodies function normally above 4,600 meters, at altitudes where the rest of us would be gasping and deteriorating. That gene didn't evolve in Tibetans. It came from the Denisovans, passed down through interbreeding. They weren't just surviving at altitude, they were physically engineered for it, shaped by generations of selection to live in air that would kill most humans. Adapted to the Tibetan highlands, adapted to the low forests of Southeast Asia, adapted to the Siberian steppe. 3 completely different environments, 3 separate populations, each one near perfectly matched to where it lived. And that's exactly what trapped them. The Denisovans in Tibet had no real reason to communicate with the Denisovans in Siberia. No shared narrative, no framework of belonging that crossed terrain. Their adaptation ran sideways, each group burrowing deeper into its specific niche, not building anything upward, nothing that could bridge the gaps between them. When sapiens showed up, carrying the ability to walk up to a total stranger and make them feel like kin through a shared story, the Denisovans had nothing to counter with. Being a perfect fit for one place turns into a death sentence the moment that place stops being the whole world. Then there's Homo floresiensis, 3.5 feet tall, brain roughly the size of a chimpanzee's, isolated on the island of Flores in Indonesia, cut off from the mainland by ocean that didn't give easy crossings. And still, fossil evidence shows deliberate stone toolcraft, coordinated hunts of dwarf elephants, animals that outweighed them, fire use, by any straight definition of the word intelligent. But their entire world was one island. Researchers estimate their total population at any given point probably sat in the low thousands at most. Contained. Every generation living and dying within the same coastline. No information coming in from outside.
Nothing flowing out.
If you're still here, this is where it shifts. This stops being about them and starts being about you. Hit subscribe before the next part. Because what sapiens had that none of these species possessed is still active in you right now, whether you realize it or not. Around 50,000 years ago, sapiens reached Flores. They didn't come as isolated individuals. They arrived as a network connected to tools, knowledge, and populations that Floresiensis had never encountered and genuinely couldn't have conceived of. It wasn't a dramatic war. It was something quieter and more absolute than that. A collision between a closed system and an open one. Between a species whose entire world was this island and a species whose world didn't have a fixed edge. Isolation. In evolutionary terms, ... isn't protection, ... isn't. It's a slow extinction, ... The problem is you don't recognize it as it's happening, not until the last morning it finishes, ... 1952. But wait, if you've been paying attention, you already have a problem with this argument. And you're right to. Because everything I've built this on so far has a crack in it. Language. Neanderthals had a hyoid bone, the small curved structure in the throat that makes complex speech mechanically possible, and theirs was nearly identical to ours. Art. In 2018, researchers dated painted shells and geometric engravings at Cueva de los Aviones in Spain to roughly 65,000 years ago. That's older than any cave art sapiens has left behind. Older. Neanderthals were making symbolic, decorated objects before we were. Emotion. Shanidar 1 answered that 40,000 years ago and left the evidence in the dirt. So cross off language, cross off art, cross off emotion, cross off tools, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Floresiensis, all of them made and used tools with genuine skill and intention. Every tidy answer, the kind that feels satisfying the moment you land on it, turns out to be wrong. What separated us wasn't any of the things we typically point to when we talk about what makes humans special. It was something harder to name. Something that left no bones in the ground, no carved marks on a cave wall. Something that, when you finally hear it said plainly, almost sounds too quiet to have changed everything. The answer isn't where anyone thinks to look. Not language, not fire, not tools. Pull all of those off the table, and one question remains. What could sapiens do that no other species could scale? Here's where the evidence lands. Sapiens developed the capacity to collectively believe in things that have no physical existence. Not delusion, not madness, something stranger and more powerful than either of those shared fiction. A god living inside a mountain. An ancestor whose attention follows the hunting party. A law that holds two total strangers accountable to each other even though they've never met and never will. A flag. A currency. A nation. None of these exist the way a boulder or a river exists. You cannot hold a nation in your hands. You cannot pass a law across a fire like a piece of meat. You cannot point at a spirit and say, "There, do you see it?" And yet, the moment two people believe in the same invisible thing, something extraordinary happens. They can cooperate. Not just with the 15 people they grew up alongside with hundreds, thousands, strangers across distances, across generations, across every boundary that geography and blood would otherwise draw hard around them. Anthropologist Yuval Noah Harari calls this the cognitive revolution. but the mechanism underneath that label is simpler and far weirder than the name suggests. It's the ability to extend the circle of trust past the edge of what you can personally see. Neanderthals trusted who they knew. The people in their group, maybe 15 individuals, faces memorized, wounds dressed, names spoken since birth. That trust was not small. It was worth 40 years of daily care for a man who brought nothing material back to the group. Deep, documented, proven trust. Sapiens trusted anyone who believed the same story. That gap between trusting 15 people and trusting 15,000 strangers is the entire distance between a hunting party and a civilization. Between a technique that works in one valley and a network that spans a continent. The most powerful weapon our species ever produced was never carved from flint. It was built from a sentence, one that someone decided to believe, and then told to a stranger who believed it too. Now bring this home. Because this isn't a history lesson. This is running in your body right now. Between 1 and 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. Not as a figure of speech, this comes from direct genome sequencing. The actual biological code inside your actual cells carries the signature of people who hunted in tight formation, who dressed each other's wounds, who kept a disabled man alive for decades in a mountain cave in Iraq. You carry Shanidar 1 in you. You carry the people who chose not to leave him. You carry 400,000 years of a loyalty so fierce it shows up in the fossil record as healed bones. And then layered over that, the part that isn't in the Neanderthal 1 to 4% is the mutation. The thing that tipped the balance. Right now, in this moment, you are using it without thinking about it. You found this video because a system connected you to a loose community of strangers who are curious about the same question. You don't know their names. You haven't seen their faces. You will almost certainly never be in the same room as most of them. And yet here you are. Inside the same story, the same invisible structure of shared meaning that underpins every human institution that has ever existed. Imagine that for a second. You didn't find this community through family. You didn't find it through geography. You found it through an idea, through the sense that there's something worth understanding about what we are and how we ended up here. That pull you feel toward the question. That's not just curiosity as a personality trait. That is the specific cognitive adaptation that let your ancestors outlast every other human species on this planet. Curiosity extended outward. Trust built from story rather than blood. A circle of belonging that could keep expanding, past every horizon the other species hit and couldn't cross. You are the heir of every lineage that didn't survive, and the living proof of the one that found a different way through. Go back to that cave in Shanidar, Iraq. The withered arm, the collapsed socket, the fused ear canal. A man who contributed nothing to the hunt, nothing to the defense of the group, nothing that a cold calculation of survival would have kept on the ledger. And people fed him anyway. Stayed with him, chose him, over and over, for what researchers estimate spans decades of deliberate care.